was sitting like this the whole time. So today I got a pillow so that I can be more comfortable. But I know for a fact that I'm gonna be like this again. Welcome to episode 2. I think no more than 3 people are gonna watch this episode all the way through because it's going to be very long. I already know it's gonna be very long because I checked my notes and then I tried to summarize them and I transcribed them to my laptop and I ended up writing 14 pages. So I think this video is gonna be at least 2 hours. I'm actually worried about how long it's gonna be, but at the same time it's okay because I couldn't omit more information. Oddly enough, I am more nervous this time than I was when I was filming the first episode. I don't know why. Beginnings are supposed to be more nerve-wracking, but now I'm more nervous. But I'm also excited because it's a story that I'm very excited to share for some reason. So let's begin. Let's see if I can finish before the sun sets. That's the challenge. Today I'm gonna tell you the story of one of the most enigmatic people I have ever heard of. And it's the story of Ted Bundy. I was trying to figure out the flow of the storytelling in this episode because the story has a lot of details, it has a lot of dates, it has a lot of names, it can be a bit confusing and like you might feel exhausted at some point, but I tried to make it as simple and as easy as possible. So I might not mention all the names, I might not read all the dates, I'll just mention the most important things, or I will point out the most important people in the story. I hope you enjoy this. I don't think you will, but maybe. Or at least maybe I can just keep you company if you can't sleep. Okay, we start at the beginning. I will start by talking about Ted Bundy's early life. He was born on November 1946 in Vermont, and his name was Theodore Robert Cowell. When his mother was pregnant with Ted, his dad was not in the picture. No one knows anything about him. At that time, it was taboo for a woman to be pregnant with a child if she's not married. So she was very ashamed with her pregnancy because her kid was illegitimate. She actually did think about having an abortion, but then she gave up on the idea. She wanted to fight for her son. So what she did was, because she needed support and she wanted to be away from the public eye and the scrutiny of people, she spent her pregnancy in Elizabeth Lund Home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. And after Ted was born, she moved back with her parents and she raised Ted with her parents. And when he turned 4, she moved with Ted to Tacoma in Washington. And this is where she met a very sweet man. He was a cook and his name was Johnny Bundy. And together they had 4 children. Now, as a child, Ted is described as very rebellious. He had a mean streak to him. His cousin says that he liked to build tiger traps in the woods. Children would actually get hurt from those tiger traps that he built. They also say that he had a bit of a temper. And even as a kid, he liked to scare people. As an adult, he did that as well, like to quietly walk behind a friend or sneak up behind a friend and make them jump. So he always had this mischievous personality ever since he was a child. There's also this very haunting story that I read in Anne Rule's book. When his aunt was 15 and they were still living with his grandparents, his aunt once woke up and she found all the knives from the kitchen surrounding her silhouette as she was sleeping. And then she got up and she looked at Ted. He was there, he was 3 years old. She looked at him and he was just standing there smiling. He was this toddler and he went to the kitchen, he grabbed all the knives and he placed them around his aunt, which was a very strange thing. Ted would say that he was very close to his grandfather. He admired him a lot. He really loved his grandfather. He was probably the only father figure he had when he was a kid. And he was never really close to his stepdad. His stepdad himself, he says that Ted always felt a bit of an outsider in the family. Ted grew up very passionate about politics. He was very, very obsessed with politics. And when he was in high school, his dream was to become president. He always felt like he had a lot to offer in politics. There's a journalist, his name is Stephen Michaud. This journalist spent a lot of time with Ted, but later on in the story. He spent a lot of time with him. He got to know him. Michaud says that he believes that Ted's passion for politics is largely because politics is a lot about image. It's about being charismatic, it's about putting on a show and selling something to masses of people. I think it makes a lot of sense because as we go on in the story, you will understand why Ted Bundy fits this description. You will understand why later. Ted Bundy was very good at socializing, he was really good at making conversation, and people were drawn to him. Everyone says that he was very attractive, he was very charismatic, and that's power. Ted Bundy did very well in academics. He was a very bright child. He was very studious. He did very well. In 1966, he graduated with a psychology degree. And this is a very important timestamp because this is when Ted Bundy met Diane Edwards. She was his first love, his first serious relationship. And they were actually very happy together. They had a very sweet relationship. They had similar interests. They were very compatible in many ways. Ted would describe her as tall, attractive, very good dresser, successful, came from a wealthy family, and it was truly the first time he found himself in love with a girl. After graduating with his psychology degree, he applied to multiple law schools and he wanted to go to the best one. However, when his LSATs, which is the law school admission test, when he got the results back, they weren't very good. And he was very, very severely depressed. So the only option he had left was to go to the University of Puget Sound for law. And it was a night school. At that time, he felt like such a failure. Not only was it a very depressing time for him because he failed his tests and because he couldn't get into the university that he wanted to go to, but he also broke up with Diane. She actually broke up with him. But at the same time, it was very understandable. And I'm gonna explain to you why. They were in love. They did like each other very much. However, Diane really knew what she wanted. She was a very successful person. She had her life planned out. She came from a very wealthy background. In a way, Ted also felt very insecure with her because he felt like he wasn't able yet to give her what she expects. And she felt like he was still kind of lost. She didn't see him as a stable person who really knew where he was heading. And so they ended it. So that time, this period of time was extremely depressing for Ted. And we all go through these, these phases in our lives where we feel like nothing is working out. Relationships with people, work or school stuff, nothing. We feel like everything is just crumbling down on us. And that was what this period of time was for Ted. All around it was, as he describes it, a nightmare of a situation. And in a way, he admits it, that he wanted to get revenge on Diane. And I'm gonna tell you that he actually did. So now we're going to skip to the future. I'm going to tell you that after 2 years or so, after it was a point in his life where he was doing very well in school. He got into law school. He had a job. He was feeling more confident. They happened to meet at the city where he was living. So they reconnected in a way. Took her out to very fancy restaurants and they put back on the table this idea of getting married and they started planning for it. However, one day, Ted just disappeared. And he disappeared from Diane's life without any explanation. And this is how he got revenge on her. Now we skip to when Ted Bundy met his second love, and her name was Liz Candle. Actually, I learned that Candle is her pen name. It's not her real last name. They just refer to her as Liz. Liz was his main relationship because together they stayed on and off for 4 years. And it was an intense time, to say the least. It was 1969 or early 1970. Ted and Liz, they met in Seattle. At that time, Ted was living in Seattle and Liz had moved to Seattle. She was a single mom. She had her daughter, gotten a divorce, a recent divorce, and she wanted to start a new life. And she met Ted at a bar next to his university, I think. And actually, she was the one who approached him. He was sitting there and he was across the room from her. She noticed him. She said that he looked so handsome. He stood out in the crowd and he was a good dresser, he was tall, and he looked sad. So she approached him and she asked him, "Are you okay? Why do you look sad?" He actually was sad. He was lost in thought at that time before she came and she, shook him up. So they spent the night talking. They spent a good time at the bar, and then she offered him a ride because he didn't have his car. Before she returned home, or before she dropped him off, she told him, I have to go. I have to go to my babysitter and pick up my daughter." So he went with her, and he got out of the car and he helped her carry her daughter. He was very sweet. He was such a gentleman. She always says like he had this very gentleman attitude to him. They got back to the car and Molly, her daughter, she was sitting on his lap and she was falling asleep. And then he offered to take Molly up to the apartment, so he carried her up. And Liz told him, "If you want, because we're drunk and everything, you can stay if you want." And she was very surprised by herself because he was a stranger. They only just met, and she offered him to stay over for the night. But she trusted him. She had this instinct of, I trust this person. So he said okay. He stayed. She laid back on her bed and she fell asleep. The last thing she saw was Ted standing on her dresser and he was checking her stuff out. Then when she woke up in the morning, she heard noise coming from the kitchen. She went to the kitchen and she found Ted making her breakfast. He was dressed in last night's clothes and he was making her breakfast. And then he gestured, because her daughter was still sleeping. He was this perfect person in front of her that she just met when she moved to Seattle, and he quickly became her dream husband. Like, she wanted to marry him. She started seeing him as her life partner. He really did form this sweet little family. And even for Ted, it was very new to him. He really loved Liz and he really loved her daughter. He really did have this father figure for Molly. They had really good memories with him. So to recap, Ted and Liz, they met in 1969 or early 1970. Now we're gonna jump to 1974. Something happens that shakes Seattle. A girl, her name was Linda Ann Healy. She was a young student who also worked at the radio station. She was the person who did the weather report in the morning. A lot of men were in love with her voice, and she was a girl that a lot of people admired. One day she disappeared. And it was very odd because she was not known to just randomly take off and come back after a couple of days or something. She was a very disciplined person. So it was very strange for her friends and family. So her disappearance was very unlike her. The police came to investigate. They started searching her room, which seemed very normal. Nothing was out of place, and there wasn't any sign of foul play or anything like that. However, when the detective pulled out the cover from her bed, he found blood on her pillow and on the sheets, which was extremely strange because her bed was so perfectly made. Linda Ann Healy is gone. So that was in April. Now we go to May. Roberta Park, she was 22, a student at Oregon State University. She was raped and killed. Now we go to June 1st. Brenda Carol Ball, who was 22, she disappears in South Seattle. Another disappearance in June. Georgianne Hawkins, she was a student at Washington University. Every month there were more and more disappearances, and girls were advised to travel in packs, especially if they're walking down an alley or coming back home late at night. They were advised not to walk alone, but to travel in twos or more. There was a new disappearance every month. At some point there were 6 unsolved cases. Terror gripped Seattle. Hitchhiking even stopped. So investigators started studying the patterns of the killings. At some point they started believing that it might be a cult thing, that what was happening was some kind of a human sacrifice. They thought it might be a ritual for Satanism or witchcraft, especially given the fact that the girls who were missing or murdered, they looked very much alike. They had things in common. They all had very long brown hair and it was parted in the middle. And now we go to July. 2 more disappearances. Denise Nasland and Janice Oat. However, there was a big event. It was a place where there was a lake and people were having picnics and people were swimming. It was very crowded. So after the disappearances of Janice and Denise, people started mentioning a guy called Ted. Described him as a young man who was tan, he was wearing tennis shoes and shorts, and he had a cast on. They said that he was approaching some of the girls, asking them if they would help him attach his boat to his car or something because he had a cast on and he couldn't do it. Some of the girls felt very uneasy in his presence. For example, one girl said that when she got close to his car, she noticed that the passenger seat was removed. That felt a bit strange to her. She panicked and she pretended like she was busy and she left. Another girl said that something about him made me feel a bit uneasy. So she also made an excuse and she left. So it was a good thing that people started mentioning a guy called Ted. So now they have a name. They also said that he had a cast on, which also narrows down the research. And they also said that he had a Volkswagen Bug. Now they were determined to find out if this suspect is actually called Ted. So what they did was they started looking at driver's licenses, checking out every person who drives a Volkswagen Bug. And to speed up the process, they also started looking at criminal records, just in case a guy called Ted or Theodore comes up in the criminal records. Now, if you think the fact that they had someone called Ted who drives a Volkswagen Bug narrowed down the research and made it easy, you're mistaken. They said that at this point, there were 42,000 owners of Volkswagen Bugs, so investigators were dealing with masses of information. Now, another important thing happens, and that thing pushed the investigation even further. Remember Liz, Ted's girlfriend? She was getting concerned. Even though she was reluctant to, she ended up calling the police. She told them that she's very concerned about her boyfriend, and his name is Ted. The investigators told her that we're getting calls from girlfriends claiming that their boyfriend might be suspicious every day. So just give us something that proves to us that you are worth our time. So first she told them that she felt very uneasy when she saw the composite sketch that they got from the newspaper, which is the police sketch that they do of a suspect. A colleague handed it to her at work and she told her, doesn't he look familiar? And his name is Ted? So Liz at that time she said, of course not, what are you talking about? But then when she looked at the sketch again, she felt like he was extremely familiar to her. She begged the police that he needs to be checked out. She also claims that she found some things in his apartment that were very concerning. She once found women's underwear in his apartment and she was too scared to question him about it. She found a cast, she found crutches, and she didn't call once, by the way. She ended up calling the investigators 2 or 3 times because the evidence kept piling up in her life. She called them another time and said that she found a knife under his driver's seat and that sometimes, which was very unusual for him, he would be late to very important events that they had going on together. He had a Volkswagen Bug. He lived next to the University of Washington, where a lot of the murders happened. She also said that he would go out a lot in the middle of the night. She wouldn't know where he was going, and that he would nap a lot during the day. He would fall asleep on the carpet in the living room. He was tired all the time. She was so concerned to the point where she went to the library and she read the newspapers again. She checked the dates where the disappearances happened, the murders happened, and she would think back at where Ted was during those dates. And then she discovered that he was nowhere around her during those dates. So the detectives wanted to know more. They met with her multiple times. They recorded their conversations. They asked her a lot of questions, and some of those questions were extremely uncomfortable to her, but she had to cooperate. She had no choice. They would ask her about their sexual relationship, Ted's sex drive, if he was violent, if there was something unusual happening, but they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They also asked her this weird question if he likes her hair being long and parted in the middle. She said, yes, he really likes my hair long and he always begs me not to cut my hair. And she said, why? What does that have to do with anything? They explained to her that all the missing girls, they have the same look, they have the same hairstyle. She was extremely conflicted during that time. Even though she was talking to the police about him, she was still in a relationship with him. So everything was normal between them, but she was also very concerned. She so badly wanted to be wrong because she could not imagine him being a violent person or someone who would do anything horrendous like that. It was just inconceivable to her. It was just impossible for her to ignore the signs. So we're still in 1974. Ted wanted to leave the University of Puget Sound, the law school. He wanted to go to a good law school. He was actually accepted in the University of Utah, and so he moved to Salt Lake City. Now it was September 1974, and some of the remains of the missing girls were being found here and there in Washington and in the mountains. Now in October 1974, a girl, Melissa Smith, she was 18, she was abducted, raped, and strangled in Utah. Now Liz was getting more concerned because the murders are following Ted. Everything was happening in Seattle, then everything stopped in Seattle. Ted moved to Utah, murders are happening in Utah. October 31st, another murder. Laura Ann Emme, she was 17, raped and murdered in Utah, and her remains were found on Thanksgiving in a mountainous area. Now it's November 8th. Carol Durange, she was 18 years old. She was kidnapped at Fashion Palace Mall in Murray, Utah. But thankfully, she managed to escape. She immediately went to the police station, and according to Durange, the guy was posing as a police officer. He apparently told her that we found someone trying to steal your car. Please, I would like you to come with me so you can file a complaint. So she went with him. She got into his car. He was able to handcuff one of her hands, but she was flailing around a lot. And then he took out a gun and he told her, if you don't stop, I will blow your brains out. She was so scared that she told him, just do it and get it over with. But she was a fighter. She kept fighting. She started screaming. She opened the door. She jumped from the car. He stopped the car. He tried to grab her again. They started grappling on the floor. She ran again and she got into another car and she asked the people to take her to the police station. Now, we're in Utah. It's August 16th. It's almost 2:30 a.m. Sergeant Bob Hayward, a 22-year veteran of Utah Highway Patrol, he pulled up in front of his house in suburban Granger, Utah, and that's when he noticed a light-colored Volkswagen Bug driving by very slowly in a very suspicious manner. Now, Hayward has a lot of experience. He's been a sergeant for 22 years and he had a sixth sense by now. He was able to tell when something feels a bit off-center. And in his neighborhood, he knows everyone. He knows all the cars, the people who reside there, or the visitors who come to the neighborhood sometimes. But this car was new to him. So he flashed his lights. First thing he did was to check the plate. There was a high-speed chase at some point, and then the Volkswagen Bug driver decided to stop. The guy got out of the car and he said, well, I guess I'm lost. And Sergeant Hayward looked at him and he asked him, what are you doing at this time of the day? It's very early in the morning. And the guy said, I was watching the towering inferno at Rosewood Drive-In Theater. So Sergeant Hayward told him that that can't be true because this movie is not showing at Rosewood Drive-In Theater. He asked the guy to give him his driver's license. He gave it to him. He read Theodore Robert Bundy. And the license was issued in Salt Lake City. He asked him if he can check his car. And Ted said sure. He flashed the light and he started checking the car on the inside. And this is where he found a crowbar behind the driver's seat. And he found an open satchel next to the driver's seat. In the satchel, he found a ski mask, an ice pick, some ropes and wires. And Hayward looked at him and he told him, those seem to me like a burglar's tool. So he arrested him, frisked him, and he took him to the police station. Now, at the station, another detective was checking the satchel. Not only did he find these very strange stuff and the ski mask, they also found a grotesque-looking mask, which was made from a pair of stockings with the eye part cut out. And they also found handcuffs. They asked Ted, where did you get all these things? And Ted Bundy, being Ted Bundy, had an answer for everything. Those are stuff I picked up from my house or thrown out stuff that I thought would be useful. They also searched his car and they found very big green garbage bags. And so they decided to confiscate all his stuff, and they told him that we assume the district attorney will be issuing a charge for possession of burglary tools. Something very important also happened on this night. When Ted was at the station, he came face to face with Detective Jerry Thompson. Now, who is Detective Jerry Thompson? He is the detective who Liz, Ted's girlfriend, was talking to. But he didn't think anything of it. Detective Jerry Thompson was busy at the station. They just crossed eyes, that's it. And Ted was bailed out in the morning, and that was his first ever arrest. So now he has a criminal record. That was August 16th. Now, August 18th, Detective Jerry Thompson was at the office, and he was checking the latest arrests, the latest reports. And then the name Bundy caught his eye. He thought to himself, I've heard this name before, but I just can't place it. And then he started reading Bundy's report carefully, and he read that this Bundy guy had a light-colored Volkswagen Bug, and he saw that the list of items that were confiscated were also very strange. So he pulled the Carol DeRange file, the girl who was kidnapped but who managed to escape, and he saw that in the two reports they were handcuffs. However, the handcuffs brand was different. But then he thought to himself, why would a guy just randomly have a pair of handcuffs in his car? He also noticed that a crowbar was listed, and he remembered that Carol DeRange said that she was threatened by a crowbar. So he started noticing all these links. He also read that he was a law student from Utah. He remembered that this is the guy that the girl was talking about, Liz. He also found more similarities. That Ted was arrested in Granger that morning, which was only a few miles away where the girl Melissa disappeared. So Detective Jerry Thompson was starting to link the stories together. So that was August 18th. Now on August 21st, and he low-key felt that they have the man they've been looking for. They got Ted to sign a permission to have them search his apartment. I was there with them. They went in. It was very clean, very organized, nothing really out of the ordinary, because they were hoping to find something related to the missing girls. Something like accessories, clothing, anything. Because usually murderers, they like to take souvenirs from whatever murder they commit. Sometimes they take pictures, sometimes they take any object, any item related to that person. But they couldn't find anything. However, they found something strange, which was a meat hook, a very big meat hook dangling from the ceiling, and from it was attached a bicycle wheel and a bunch of knives and stuff. So the detective looked at him, and Ted just said, I like to cook. Now, they found something else that's also going to be very important in the investigation. They found a brochure for a ski resort in Colorado, and in this pamphlet, specifically, Wildwood Inn was marked. Now, let me tell you why this is significant. Because in Wildwood Inn, in the ski resort in Colorado, a woman was missing. Now, Ted, as usual, he brushed it off and he said that the pamphlet is not even mine. I don't know, maybe someone left it here. So they were getting more and more suspicious. Now, next thing they did was to show Ted's picture to Carol DeRange, the girl who was kidnapped but managed to escape. Showed her a pile of pictures of different suspects. Ted didn't really stick out to her. However, she felt something for the picture. So she just grabbed the picture and put it on the side. And the detective asked her, like, why did you take this picture out specifically? She said, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure that this is the guy, because I feel like he looked different back then. And this is something that they said a lot about Ted, is that he had this power to transform sometimes. He looked different in a lot of pictures. But then when they showed her his picture from his driver's license, she immediately identified him. So from then on, after this first arrest, Ted Bundy was constantly surveilled by the police. And he was very conscious about that, by the way. He continued his life. He would visit Liz. Liz would visit him. They knew that the police was following them everywhere, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. He would also have fun with the idea. Sometimes he would drive fast, and it made him very happy when he managed to lose the police. But then he got really nervous and angry when he discovered that his school records were being subpoenaed, which means that his school records became documents that could be used as evidence in the investigation. On October 1975, Ted was part of a lineup at the police station, and when Carol DeRanche was asked to identify the guy who kidnapped her, she pointed at Ted. And Ted was arrested and charged with the aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault of Carol DeRanche. He was led to Salt Lake County Jail, and he was awaiting his trial. So that was in October 75. Now it's February 76, and Bundy's trial begins. He waived his right to a jury. He wanted the judge to decide his fate, and he was found guilty. And he was sentenced to a minimum of 1 to a maximum of 15 years in Utah State Prison. Now, it doesn't end here. The same night that Carol DeRanche was kidnapped and managed to escape, Debbie Kent was abducted nearby in a parking lot, and then she was found murdered. Now, the reason why they were able to link these two events together is because, remember how Carol DeRanche had a handcuff? The key to this handcuff was found in the parking lot where Debbie Kent was abducted. So now they have evidence and they have a witness. And in October 1976, Bundy was served another warrant for the arrest of another murder in Colorado. That was for the murder of Karen Campbell, the girl who was abducted and murdered in the ski resort. In May 1977, Ted Bundy, of course, pled not guilty to that crime. And after being served that warrant for the arrest of the murder in Colorado, he had to be extradited to Colorado. And he did not fight extradition, so he went to Colorado and he wanted to fight for his release. Ted did not care. He was confident that he was going to win. He started preparing for his trial, and according to his attorney at that time, he was very difficult to work with. Ted was very arrogant, he was very egocentric. He wouldn't trust his attorneys, he wouldn't trust his lawyer, he would evade questions about the case. What he mostly did was just complain about his life in prison. One day the press was filming him, coming back, I think, from the library to his cell. His feet were shackled, and he's carrying a very big box filled with documents and books and papers and stuff. He jokingly said, and bitterly said actually, that my classmates are gonna graduate in a month, but I bet you that I know about the law more than any of them. He literally did not want to rely on his lawyer. He wanted to represent himself, and he spent all his time preparing for his defense. Now the trial began, and it was going well, everything was going smoothly, and then at some point they had to take a break. They had to take a recess, so Ted's attorney was in the hallway smoking a cigarette, and Ted was in the back of the courtroom in the library zone. He was doing research. At some point, the deputy walks into the courtroom and he asked the attorney, "Where's Ted?" And his attorney jokingly said, "I don't know, it wasn't my time to babysit him." So they freaked out, and then someone from the first floor came to them and said that someone just jumped from the second floor window. They had literally left Ted unshackled, unwatched in the courtroom as a convicted murderer, and windows were open, so he saw his chance and he jumped from the second floor window. And at that time, when Ted Bundy was gone, people were getting very creative, and I'm gonna give you all the examples. Women were wearing t-shirts that said Ted Bundy is a one-night stand, and there were slogans like "Bundy's free, you can bet your ass" pen on it, and another one was "Bundy lives on Rocky Mountain High," and another slogan, "Bundy's in booth D." Apparently booth D was, this is what they called the zone and restaurant where people could make drug deals. And one restaurant put a Bundy burger on the menu, and it said "Open the bun and the meat has fled." And there was a Bundy cocktail served locally, and it was made from tequila, rum, and 2 Mexican jumping beans. And hitchhikers, wanting to be assured of a ride out of Aspen, they wore signs reading "I am not Bundy." Now I'm gonna tell you about what actually happened. While Ted was preparing for his defense, he was also preparing for something else. He started strengthening his body. He would go to the top bunk in his cell, and he would jump over and over and over because he wanted to strengthen his legs for impact. And mentally, he was measuring distance from the courthouse to the alley, from the alley to the riverbed, from the riverbed to the mountains. And then he measured his cell, and he would walk those distances over and over and over again. He also practiced how rapidly he can change his clothes, and he got a haircut when he was in jail so that he can be less recognizable. And when he was at the courthouse, unshackled, and the windows were open, his chance was there, and he jumped. And now the manhunt began. Apparently, Ted started hiking and hiking and hiking, and then he found a cabin, he found some food, he was able to take shelter for a bit, but then he had to leave again, he had to keep hiking. It was very cold, he was very hungry, he was fighting the elements. At some point, he was so cold and tired that literally his body went into shock and he was very disoriented. He was literally willing to risk it all. He thought, I'm gonna go back to Aspen and we'll see what happens, because he needed food and warmth. But then they found him. And Ted was serving a charge for kidnapping and murder in the first degree. Now he's also serving escape charges. Now it's the end of the year. It's December 30th, 1977. And the prison guard, who, just like always, takes the food tray to Ted's cell. He went to the cell, he placed the food, and he left. And in the morning, he came back, and the food plate was still full. It was untouched. And Ted was apparently sleeping in his bed. A couple of hours passed, and Ted was not moving. So the guard went into the cell, he lifted the covers, and all he found was books. I love how in her book Anne Rule said that Ted's law books managed to set him free, not in the accepted way. Second escape was a nightmare because they had no clue where he could have gone to. So what they did was they called everyone they could think of. They called Liz, they called his mom, they called his friends, and they threatened them. They threatened them with arrest if they don't provide them with information in case they knew what Ted was up to. Now I'm going to tell you what really happened. Currently in Ted's cell, there is a light fixture that he was able to remove. It was 12 by 12 inches, and for a while Ted was starving himself down. He piled his books, stood on them, he went through his ceiling, and above his cell there was the apartment of one of the jailers. He took some of his clothes, and he walked out the front door. Now Ted was 16 days missing, and on January 1978 there was a very horrific murder in Florida State University in Tallahassee. 4 women were brutally attacked in the Chi Omega sorority house. 2 of them died, the other 2 survived. Apparently the girls were attacked in their sleep with an oak log, they were strangled, and they were molested. And because it was nighttime and the house was dark, and because they didn't know what hit them, they did not see who their attacker was. On the same night, while the policemen and the investigators were outside the Chi Omega sorority house, they get a radio call saying that nearby there was another attack in a duplex house. So the sheriff was thinking, could it be the same person? It's inconceivable, because usually when murderers do something horrific, they leave the scene of the crime and they disappear. They don't move on to the next house and they do more. It's very unusual. And on the same night, the sheriff gets a phone call and he's informed that there is a convicted murderer who escaped from a prison in Utah. But he didn't think much of it because, Florida it's another state. Now, this is where I mention a very important person in this story. And I want you to remember his name. It's Sheriff Ken Kitsaris. He was the Leon County Sheriff in Florida. That night he went to the morgue where they were examining the bodies of the girls found in Chi Omega, and he noticed something that he thought might be extremely important. On the body of one of the girls, he found 2 bite marks in the same spot. Now keep in mind that Sheriff Ken Kitsaris is a very smart and very educated sheriff. He also taught advanced forensics, and he knew that bite marks can be very important evidence. Now we skip. Ted is 40 days missing, and a little girl who was 12 years old, her name is Kimberly Leach, she was abducted in front of her school. Now I'm gonna tell you what happened after Ted's second escape. After the Colorado escape, Ted got on a bus, he went to Denver. From Denver, he took a flight to Chicago, then got on a train to Ann Arbor, a city in Michigan. He was there to watch his University of Washington play the University of Michigan in the Rose Bowl. He got drunk watching in a college bar and almost got himself beaten by Michigan fans. He spent a night at a sanctuary of a Methodist church. He stole a car the next day. He went to Atlanta. He took a bus to Tallahassee, Florida State University. He was free for more than 40 days. He got a room in the Oak, next to the university campus. He was literally enjoying his life. He would go out in the morning, he would buy beer, he would buy milk, he would buy breakfast. He found an old bicycle, he fixed it, and he would ride the bicycle everywhere. He went to Pensacola, he had the best day. He took a swim, slept on the sand, he tanned. But before he did all this, as soon as he got to Florida, first thing he needed was a fake identity. So he stole the identity of a guy called Chris Hagen. Now one day, when he was driving a stolen car, carrying 21 stolen credit cards, many of which belonged to co-eds, university students, at 1:30 a.m., David Lee, a patrolman with the Pensacola Police Department, noticed a suspicious car loitering and driving erratically. He checked the plate and he found that the car was stolen. So after a high-speed chase, he stopped the car and the guy claimed that he was a law student. He refused to give his real identity. He was charged with a stolen car, stolen IDs, and resisting a police officer. At the station, he was annoying everyone. He wouldn't talk. He would postpone telling the truth. He would tell them, I will tell you who I am if you give me a cell with a window. I would tell you who I am if I can see the full moon from the window. At some point, they were literally losing patience. And finally, he told them, I will tell you everything if you allow me one phone call. And so they did. They gave him one phone call, and he calls Liz. She was very worried because she knew that he had escaped from jail. He told her, don't worry, the police has me, I'm okay, I'm in Florida. And when he said Florida, her heart stopped literally because they knew by then about the horrific murders that happened in Florida. So it was obvious to her at this point. Then he told her, I'm really sorry for the way I am. And then she told him, what do you mean? You mean you're sick? And he got really angry with her. He got very defensive. He said, back off me. This is not what I meant. I'm sorry for putting you in this situation. They ended the call, but then he called her the next day and he told her, Liz, I'm sorry for yesterday and you're right, I am sick. So this is where Ted Bundy admitted to his girlfriend that he was the person responsible for all these horrific things. But then he promised her that this ends now and it ends here, that he's going to admit to everything and that he has to take accountability for everything that he's done. Now, during that time, the investigation was ongoing, and the investigators decided to focus their attention on the stolen car. They discovered that this car was stolen from somewhere near the university where the Chi Omega sorority house was. And so on February 17th, 1978, Ted Bundy was a primary suspect in the Chi Omega murders and Kimberly Leach, a little girl who was abducted in front of her school. They decided to have the trial in Tallahassee first because apparently it had the most secure jail. And they didn't want to take a chance anymore. They were literally sick of this guy at this point. And in Tallahassee, Ted Bundy was up for the death penalty. Ted Bundy's trial in Florida, in Tallahassee, was a very high-profile case. It was televised. There were cameras inside the courtroom, despite Ted's objection to that. They had channels from 9 different countries and news channels from all the states. It was said to be an unprecedented trial in its nature. Now, his attorneys and advisory council, they wanted him to do as little as possible and to speak as little as possible. They wanted him to sit there, look innocent, and stay quiet. They wanted to go for a low-key, low-profile strategy. But, of course, Ted Bundy did the exact opposite of that. He even wanted his lawyers out of the case. He wanted to represent himself. He wanted to be his own lawyer. By the way, before the Ted Bundy case, I didn't know that this was possible. I didn't know that you can actually represent yourself in court. And Ted Bundy was a law student, so he wanted to enjoy that. His lawyers also fought and negotiated a plea deal for Ted. They wanted to save him from the death penalty in case he was found guilty. So by taking a plea deal, by pleading guilty, instead of being executed, he can spend the rest of his life in jail. When his lawyer proposed that, Ted accepted. He said he would take the plea deal in court. But then when the trial came, he thought it would be a brilliant idea to get up without even notifying his attorneys and to start making a speech. He told the judge that his attorneys don't trust him, that they probably don't believe that he's innocent because they were pushing him to take the plea deal. And so he refused it. He refused to take the plea deal. And everyone was shocked. His attorneys were shocked. Even the prosecutionist was shocked because they literally said that in this moment, Ted Bundy gave up the deal of literally a lifetime. He was so sure of himself. He was so sure that he's not going to be found guilty, that he was willing to gamble with his life. After that moment, his attorney wanted out of the case. He wanted to quit, but the judge wouldn't let him. He told him, you stay, however, you can have less responsibilities. You can be an advisory counsel. You can advise your client. And so this is where Ted took over and he became his own lawyer in his own trial. When the media would ask him, are you sure you want to represent yourself? He would tell them, yes, of course. I choose to stand with the man I know best, and this man is me. Now remember the sheriff that I told you about? The sheriff who was very important in the story? Sheriff Kent Katsaris, the guy who found the bite, who noticed the bite marks? Well, Ted was incarcerated in the jail that this sheriff was responsible for. Sheriff Kent Kinsaris did not want to take a chance. He did not want any more escapes. So what he did was he maximized the security in Ted's cell. So he added extra sheets of metal. He added more locks and more keys, and every key was with a different person because Sheriff Kent Kinsaris understood Ted Bundy so well, and he knew that he was really good at getting what he wanted. He was really good at manipulating people. And in case he wants to talk his way out of the cell, he would have to go through multiple people. And one day when the fire marshal came in for a security checkup and everything, he asked to see the sheriff because he was shocked. He told him, "What do you think you're doing? Do you realize that if there's a fire in the prison, this prisoner would not be able to escape?" And then Sheriff Katsaris looked at him and said, "Really? You know what I want you to do? I want you to go to the nearest local newspaper and I want you to tell them that Ted Bundy is so well incarcerated that he's not going anywhere." I really love every story about Ted and Sheriff Katsaris. Like their interactions were so iconic because I feel like they were two people with equal intelligence in a way. They understood each other so well, but one guy was a good guy and the other was a bad guy. They were on the same wavelength and they were always at each other's throats. Now I'm gonna go back to the bite mark story. When he was incarcerated, Ted started noticing that they were giving him different kinds of fruits. He would ask a guy who was in a cell next to him. He would talk to him through the vent. He would ask him, "I wonder why they keep giving me different types of fruit." And then the other guy told him, "They're giving you fruit? I'm not even getting fruit." So Ted got very suspicious and he stopped eating the fruit. Sheriff Katsaris had this idea that maybe they would be able to take the bite mark from, from the apple bite or something. Then they would link the other bite mark with this one and they can find them similar. And so the sheriff had to find another solution. So what he did was he talked to the governor and he asked him for permission to do whatever it takes to get any type of information from Bundy. So one night he went to Ted Bundy's cell and he told him, "Ted, we're going for a ride." And Ted low-key got terrified because he thought that he was gonna take him out and execute him. But what they did was they put him in a van. He transported him to a dentist office. They took him out. They had him up the stairs. He was shackled, of course. They even made shackles for, feet shackles that were named the Bundy shackles, I think. Something that Sheriff Katsaris himself developed, and it was made for Ted Bundy at that time. And it was named after him. So when they were going up the stairs, Ted was seeing a lot of photographs on the walls, and he told him, he started laughing. He told him, "Oh, I see what you want to do. You want to take pictures of me. You want to take me to a studio because you don't have good pictures of me." And the sheriff told him, yeah, sure, I'm going to take pictures of you. Then they opened the door, and there stood 3 doctors with their blouses on, and behind them was a dentist chair. And Ted Bundy immediately understood. He started yelling, he started screaming, he started saying, "You don't have the right to do this." And then the sheriff told him, "Yes, I do actually have the right to do this." So he took out the warrant and he started reading it. And apparently, as part of the warrant, he is allowed to use any contraption. He can use any type of force to get what he wants. So he showed him the contraption that they can use to open his mouth, the contraption that they use in morgues. Literally, the sheriff had a search warrant for Ted Bundy's mouth. And so he sat quietly on the chair and he looked at Sheriff Katsaris and he told him, "Can, you know I'm not a violent person." This sheriff, he still remembers the way that Ted would say his name because he would say it in such an annoying way. It's literally a 1-syllable word and he had the power to turn it into a 2-syllable word, like "can." And so he sat down, he opened his mouth, and they took his bite mark. This sheriff was so smart that upon reflection, he realized that Ted would always taunt him with one specific idea. He would always tell him, "Ken, the evidence is there. You just haven't found it yet." So upon reflection, he realized that the evidence that Ted was talking about must have been the bite mark. It must have been his signature in a way. And what the sheriff did was also something new, by the way, because at that time, forensic orthology was not used. It wasn't a thing. In the Ted Bundy trial, it was introduced in a trial for the first time ever, which was to use bite marks as evidence. Now, the trial was going smoothly, and Ted was doing relatively okay as his own lawyer. However, there were times where his behavior was somewhat inappropriate, and I will tell you one example. One time he was questioning a detective. A detective was up on the stand and he started asking him questions, very specific questions about the crime scene. And it made everyone feel so uneasy and so uncomfortable. And it was so uncalled for. He would literally ask the detective, "Can you describe what you saw when you lifted the covers in as much detail as you can recall? If you need to use your report, please feel free to do so." The detective who had to answer, no matter how uncomfortable he was, he said she was lying face down. There was a considerable amount of blood around her head. There was what appeared to be a nylon stocking knitted around her neck. Her head was bloated, discolored. One of her eyelids was raised. Her eyes appeared a little glassy. And then he said, "Describe Miss Levy's body when you first entered the room." And then they objected to that because he just asked the same question. And he would also ask, "Do you recall the position of her arms?" And he wanted to hear the gory details. According to his attorney, she thought about this a lot because that day she was so uncomfortable, and she said that he must have done it on purpose because it brought him pleasure. He felt so proud hearing someone describe his work to him. It was like this detective was describing Ted's artwork to him, and it was extremely inappropriate. So they tried to object that as much as they could. And there came a moment in the trial where they talked about the bite mark. They testified about it, and there was a doctor who came in and who proved that this bite mark and the bite mark of the defendant, they are very compatible. They were able to prove that the defendant is responsible for those bite marks on the corpses. And after that day, they noticed that Ted was feeling very down because he low-key felt that it was game over for him. Even though he never admitted it, but looking at him, it was obvious. And so the next morning, everyone was ready in court and Ted was not there. The security guard walks in, he stands in front of the judge and he tells him that Mr. Bundy would not wake up. And then the judge told him, "You bring him here right now and you tell him that we start at 9:30 sharp." Then we see him walking into the courtroom. He's wearing a suit and he looks like a grumpy kid. And the judge asked him to stand in front of him. He tells him, "Mr. Bundy, the court would like to address you." He started telling him that this court does not run as you please. When we say we start at 9, we start at 9 and you are expected to be here before everyone. And then Ted Bundy started getting a bit frustrated. He pointed his finger at the judge and he would say, "I've been laboring under a tremendous amount of stress that no one here understands." And the judge got mad at him and he told him, "Don't point your finger at me, young man." And the judge was also very iconic, by the way. They love him so much. He was such a sweetheart, and he's the type of person, he is strict, but he also knows how to make a joke out of everything, to make things run smoothly, because everyone is under a lot of stress. And Ted didn't like him at all. Actually, he wanted him to step down from his position. He didn't want him to be the judge for his trial, but the judge refused. After he refused, he told Ted, "You look nice today." And Ted Bundy told him, "Thank you, I'm dressed as an attorney today." His interactions with the court people and the policemen and the detectives and everyone were so iconic, and he always had an answer for everything. And this judge was known for saying the phrase "bless your heart" a lot. He would say it to everyone. After this back and forth, the judge looked at Ted and told him, "Bless your heart. I hope you stay with us, because if you don't, we will miss you." He was so funny and he was so sweet. Okay, so the trial was done, and now it was time for closing arguments, and Ted was not ready. His team was not ready, and he tried to postpone it. He tried to postpone it from Saturday to Monday, but the judge would not have it, and Ted got mad again, but they had to do it either way. They didn't do a good job, but they had to do it. After the closing arguments were done, the jury took the time to deliberate, and they deliberated for 6.5 hours. And then the verdict came in, and Ted Bundy was found guilty. When the verdict was being read, his demeanor was very calm, even though he was very shocked. He says that he was very shocked to find that the jury found him guilty. His hand was on his mouth like this. He was listening to the verdict and no other expression. I'm going to read to you the judge's last words to Ted Bundy when the verdict was given. He told him, "Take care of yourself, young man. I say it to you sincerely, take care of yourself. It's a tragedy to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I have experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer. I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went the other way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity towards you. I want you to know that. Take care of yourself." And Ted Bundy, who was standing in front of him, he said, "Thank you." And that was it. And after this trial, where Ted was found guilty for the murder of the 2 girls in Florida from the Chi Omega house, after that there was the Kimberly Leach trial, the 12-year-old, the little girl. People were very confused about that. They were saying, what a waste of money. Like, why would you have a trial if this guy is already sentenced to death? Like, how many times can you kill a guy? But they were so done with him and they were so determined to execute him that they didn't want to risk it. Because in case the defense made an appeal again and they were not found guilty, they didn't want to risk it. So they kind of wanted to have a backup death penalty. And for the Kimberly Leach trial, they had evidence and they were sure to win. And this trial was horrible. Ted Bundy's demeanor was so bad. He had these fits of rage. He was angry all the time. He also did a bunch of inappropriate stuff. I'm gonna give you an example. By the way, you remember his girlfriend Liz? After he promised her that he was gonna admit to everything and that he was gonna end it all, when the trial started and she found that Ted was representing himself in court and he was saying that he's innocent and that he's gonna be acquitted and that he was gonna eventually be found innocent because he is innocent. When she saw him lie on the TV screen, she was done with him. She didn't want anything to do with him anymore. Despite the fact that she still loved him, she had love for him and everything, but she just couldn't do it anymore. It was just not right. But Ted Bundy was never without a woman in his life, and there was a girl, her name was Carol Boone. She was an old friend of his and she was in love with him too. She stood by him during those horrendous trials the whole time. She was literally standing next to his mom the whole time. She was very supportive. She was always talking to the media. She was trying to prove that Ted was innocent. She believed in him. She just believed that he was innocent. During the Kimberly Leach trial, he put her on the stand and he was questioning her and he asked her to describe his character for the jury. So she started describing his character, of course, with all its positive stuff. And then he asked her, while she was on the stand during the trial, he asked her if she would marry him. And she said yes. And they got married right then and there in court. It was extremely inappropriate. And the way Anne Rule expresses it in the book was so heartbreaking. She said that this trial, the 12-year-old girl, her trial, which was the anniversary of her murder, became Ted Bundy's wedding date. Carol Boone was so determined to marry him that she did a lot of research to see that under these very difficult circumstances that they were in, she wanted to see how they can get married in Florida. She discovered that a public declaration properly phrased in an open courtroom in the presence of court officers would make the ceremony legal. So literally he got married during the trial where he was being accused of murdering a kid. The journalist that I told you about, who spent a significant amount of time with Ted Bundy on death row, he would describe them as like a folie à deux couple. They were crazy together. They even managed to conceive a child when he was in prison. So yes, Ted Bundy had a kid. He had a daughter, her name is Rosie. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about her. I wish we knew something about her. I wonder if Ted Bundy has grandchildren now. It's so strange. Okay, so after the Kimberly Leach trial, which was very uncomfortable to everyone, the next day there was a verdict and Ted Bundy was of course found guilty. He showed no remorse, and at the end of the trial he got up after the verdict. He got up and he told the judge, "I would like the jury to know that they were wrong." And then he walked out. He started pushing the officers away. And now Ted Bundy is finally on death row. Now you would think that people who are sentenced to death, that they execute them the next day or the next. You're very wrong. Some of them wait for years and years before they get executed, and some of them actually die before the execution date. Now in the case of Ted Bundy, he stayed on death row for 10 years. And also, in case you didn't know that, depending on the state in America, the execution method is different. They have the execution in a gas chamber, the lethal injection, electric chair, the firing squad, which I think is the most terrifying one. At some point they had the hanging, but I don't think they do it anymore. In the case of Ted Bundy, in Florida, it was the electric chair. Now, during those 10 years, a lot has happened. They tried to appeal many times. They tried to change the verdict many times, but it didn't work. There was also a lawyer who was very, very against the death penalty, and she wanted to represent Ted again, and she wanted to try and prove his insanity. He is mentally unstable, that there's something literally neurologically wrong with his brain. She also tried to bring up his childhood, saying that his grandfather was actually found to be a horrible person. Like, Ted Bundy always talked about him in a very positive light. He would always say that he was an amazing person, he really loved him, he was very close to him. He found out that he was actually a very horrible person. And Ted Bundy must have witnessed very disturbing things as a kid. And he must have repressed these things. I don't know. They also tried to prove that at the time of his trials, when he represented himself, when he was his own lawyer, they tried to prove that he was not competent, that they should not have let him represent himself. But they also couldn't prove that. He was not found insane. He was not found incompetent. It was the exact opposite, actually. one thing remained in the end. One last desperate attempt. Ted Bundy said that he is ready to confess to all his murders. Keep in mind that for the first time ever since all of this started, all the crimes and everything, Ted Bundy admitted to his crimes 3 days before his execution. And he thought that by doing this, by telling them that he is ready to confess, that would buy him a few more years. But it did not work. They did give him a chance to confess. He sat down with an FBI agent. They had tapes with them, and he started confessing. And hearing the tapes is extremely difficult. You can also hear how he was struggling, how grueling it was for him to say everything finally. Like, having everything come out of him, it sounds painful. It sounded like he was in pain. Ted Bundy also agreed to one last interview one day before he died, and he got to choose the person. Now, unfortunately, he chose Dr. Dobson. What was his name? Dr. something Dobson. His name is Dr. James Dobson, and he was a psychologist and evangelical Christian author. I'm gonna tell you why I said unfortunately. Because I, along with a lot of people, think that this interview was in many ways very fake. You would think that he would sit for an hour with a professional, with a doctor, one day before he was executed, and that he would say something honest, 100% honest about himself, about his condition, or about what he thinks was wrong with him. But it ended up being it felt very prepared. It felt like this guy, Dr. Dobson, he had an agenda, and he wanted to use Ted Bundy's case to deliver a message to the world. Because he was a person who preached, and he was a psychologist, but he was also very involved in religion. He wanted to use this opportunity to spread the word that pornography is a bad thing. This whole interview, I think it was an hour or so, you can find it on YouTube, by the way. Ted Bundy, basically, he said that all his problems were caused by an obsession with pornography, which a lot of people think is a ton of BS. It's not true. I don't even think he was addicted to pornography. And there's a lot of people out there addicted to pornography, but they don't go out there and murder 100 people. However, it's very interesting to watch because you're literally watching a man talking about his crimes one day before he's executed. He's literally sitting in a jail cafeteria or something. He was wearing the orange sweater. He had his shackles on. And there was a moment in the interview that I can't get out of my head because it's literally terrifying. During the interview, the power went out, and Dr. Dobson panicked, and Ted Bundy told him, don't worry, they cut the power because they're testing the electric chair. Just imagine him saying those words, knowing that that's gonna be me tomorrow, sitting on this chair and being fried to death. It's horrible, it's so haunting, and I can't believe they have this on tape. So the day of his execution, Ted Bundy was described as being white as a sheet. He was so scared. He didn't eat the night before. He was very calm. He sat down. They shackled him. His last words were something along the lines of, "I'm sorry I caused so much trouble, and tell my family and friends that I love them." And then they pulled the switch. One detective described something also that I can't get out of my head, that when they turned the power on, his thumb was in between his fingers, and his hand was shaking. I can't imagine the scene. And the same detective, he was thinking, while looking at Ted's hands, he was thinking, my God, what did those hands do? On the day of his execution, people were celebrating outside the jail. People were waiting. They had fireworks. They were selling T-shirts with "Burn Bundy Burn," and Tuesday is Friday. Fry being Fry, or "Take a seat, Mr. Bundy." It was literally. Finally, I'm gonna summarize what Ted Bundy admitted to before he was executed. Ted admitted to have been involved in at least 30 homicides from 1973 till 1978, at least 7 states: California, Oregon, Utah, Washington, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. He has severed half a dozen heads of his victims, and he confessed to necrophilia. people speculate that 30 is a very low number. People speculate that it must have been at least 100 victims, at least. But he was only able to admit this much. And also, maybe he didn't even remember how many people he's killed. Maybe he doesn't even remember. I remember in the tape he said that this was the number we were able to come up with when he said 30 or so. Ted Bundy was a milestone in criminology, and I'm gonna tell you why. In 1985, the term serial killer or serial murder was still relatively new. It is said to be coined for Ted Bundy. And even though there had been a few dozen more men who had racked up horrific tolls since Ted's incarceration, Ted Bundy remained the celebrity serial killer. Ted Bundy's case taught the FBI that they needed to change their ways because with Ted Bundy, a new type of killers had emerged. This new type, in 1984, was typed by Ted Bundy, in fact. He had a psychology degree, he was unique, he was bright, he was named the Jack the Ripper of the USA. So yeah, he was a milestone in criminology, and when he was still on death row, waiting his execution, he even had FBI agents come up to him and asking for help. He once tested one guy. He told him, "What do you want from me? Why do you keep coming up to me? Why do you wake me up to come and meet with you? You guys, you are the FBI. You're supposed to be the smart guys. What do you want from me?" This FBI guy told him, "I want you to help me get better at my job. I want you to help me save more lives." And then Ted Bundy switched subjects and he started saying, "They want to kill me, you know. The state of Florida wants me dead. What about you? Do you want me dead? Would you kill me if you had a chance now?" And then this guy told him, "I don't think about it often, but if I had a chance, yeah, I would pull the switch." Ted Bundy smiled and he told him, "I've asked this question to many people, and you're the first one who was actually honest with me." Because a lot of people came up to him wanting something from him and they wouldn't be honest. Like if he asked them this question, they would say, no, of course not, I wouldn't pull the switch. No, of course not, I don't want to kill you. No, I think you're innocent, and blah blah. Like they would give him what he wants in order to get what they want. But this guy was very honest and he liked him. So he worked with him for a while. Ted Bundy would have these newspaper clippings of murders, some of which this FBI agent wasn't even working on. Ted would pick a case and he would tell him, "Come on, let's profile this case." And he would try to help him think from the standpoint of a murderer. He would tell him that, "I think he would leave evidence to mislead the police. I think at some point he's gonna go back to the scene of the crime." He would help him understand how to go about a case. Now, I want to tell you something, and I think a lot of people might hate me for this, but I wish Ted Bundy was not executed, and I'm gonna tell you why. It's explained perfectly in the book. I always used to think that killing him was a mistake in many ways, but in the book there's a paragraph that explains my viewpoint in a very perfect way. I'm gonna read this paragraph to you, since I promised you that I would read a quote every time. By the way, this final chapter is my favorite. The way I scribbled on it, because I was obsessed with this chapter. It was so good. I wanted to read 4 pages from it in front of the camera, but I think this video is already 2 hours long. So she says that killing Ted will accomplish nothing at all. All it would assure is that he would never kill again. But looking at the broken, confused man in the courtroom, I knew that Ted was insane. I cannot justify executing a man who is insane. Placing him in a mental institution with the tightest security possible could perhaps do more towards psychiatric research into the cause and hopefully cure more for the antisocial personality than the evaluation of any other individual in history. It might save the potential victims of antisocial personalities still being formed. Ted can never go free. He is dangerous and he will always be dangerous. But there are answers to vital questions locked inside his mind. And unfortunately, we will never have answers to these questions. He was a special case, and he was smart, and he was very articulate, and he was very aware of himself. A lot of people believe that he was very aware of himself. Even though he used to say that when he admitted his crimes, he would say that it was something out of his control. Remember when I told you about BTK, that he would call this thing that would take over him, he would call it the factor X? Ted Bundy calls it the entity. He would always say that the entity takes over, and there's a voice in my head that would tell me what to do. It would order me what to do, and it wasn't something I could control. However, some people believe that he was actually smart enough to control himself, and he was very good at self-reflection. The sheriff that I told you about, the very educated sheriff, also because I believe that he understood him so well, he would say that Ted was really good at compartmentalizing. Just like I explained to you last time, it's like he knew how to switch and he knew what each part of his personality was. This was power because he was very self-aware. Now, it still frustrates me endlessly, the fact that I will never know what made him become the way he was. No one knows. There are speculations, but no one can be sure. For example, Sheriff Katsaris said that when he met his mother, he saw that he noticed her hair, that it was parted in the middle and that she kind of looked like Ted Bundy's victims. So he assumed that by committing those crimes, he was killing his mother over and over and over again because he had this repressed anger towards her because she never told him that he was an illegitimate child, by the way. This was something that Ted Bundy discovered when he was a teenager. He didn't know that he was illegitimate. He didn't know that his father's identity is unknown. And his mom was so messed up in the way in her way of thinking that as a kid, she made him believe that she was his big sister and that his grandparents were his parents. So his childhood was so messed up. But because he was a smart kid, he always felt that she must be my mom. He assumed that she was his mom, but she was very secretive when it comes to where he came from, who he was, who his dad was, who his mother was. So they say that he had this very deep, dark grudge against his mom, and that she might be a big cause in what he did. Other people say that Diane also triggered something in him, his first girlfriend who left him. The victims also look like Diane, and by committing those crimes, it's like he was killing Diane over and over and over again. But again, no one can be sure. And this very big mystery of why he never harmed his girlfriend Liz and her child, no one understands why or how. Why was he able to control himself with some people, and why was he out of control with other people? By the way, when he murdered Kimberly Leach, the 12-year-old girl, she was the same age as Molly, Liz's daughter. It was insane. I know I talked a lot, but because it is a very big story, there was no way I could omit details. There was no way I could summarize it more. And lastly, I want to say that these books are amazing. These books are so well written, and they give so much detail. For example, all the details that I told you about the trials, about the crimes, about Ted Bundy's escapes and what went behind the scenes of him prepping for the escapes. Everything is detailed specifically in this book because Anne Rule was his friend, and ever since the mess started, he was maintaining correspondence with her, letters from jail back and forth the whole time until his death. And I just want to tell you how they met, by the way. When he was still a student, he used to work at the crisis clinic in Seattle. They both worked at the crisis clinic, and they were partners in the same booth. And the crisis clinic is it's like a Victorian mansion, and they have a lot of phones, and they would get phone calls from suicidal people or people in trouble, and it was their jobs to keep them calm, to talk them out of whatever they were about to do to harm themselves. So they try to stall whatever tragedy is about to happen until the police is able to get to those people. Anne said that Ted was really good at this job. He was really good at talking people out of suicides and everything. And she said, ironically, he took a lot of lives, but he also saved a lot of lives, which is extremely ironic. He was a gentleman, and he was the sweetest person she worked with when she was there. She saw him as her kid. She was older than him. She was a single mom. She had 4 children. He was the only gentleman at the crisis clinic. After every shift, he would walk her to her car at night, and he would tell her, please drive safe. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. And he was very hardworking. Her shifts were two times a week, and at night, because she wanted to put her kids to sleep, and while they were asleep, she would go to work. But Ted worked from 9 p.m. till 9 a.m. And in this book made me so emotional. I mean, if you think about it, it's written It's the book that his girlfriend wrote. Like it's the book. It's the book written by the person who knew a completely different Ted than everyone else. There's a lot of letters in the book, and he was such a good writer. I mean, who am I to judge good writing? I know nothing about literature or good writing, but I assume he's a good writer. I enjoy his letters, the romantic ones, the emotional ones, the depressed ones. His sarcasm, his dark humor. He was so clever with words. And at the end of this book, by the way, Molly, her daughter, she also talks a little bit about her experience with, life with Ted. There are very interesting stories. Oh, I have to tell you one more. I have to tell you one more before I stop. Once, Liz, her mom, was out, and Ted stayed to babysit Molly. They were playing tag together. So she was running in the house looking for him, and then in the dark living room, she saw a blob on the floor. She lifted the blanket, and he was naked. And she told him, "You're naked." And he told her, "Yeah, because I want to be invisible. I can't be invisible if I'm wearing my clothes." He told him, "Go, you have to run to home base." So he started running to home base. Home base was in the tub in the bathroom. So he sat in the tub, cross-legged, and he covered his genitals with his hands. And she said that when he lifted his eyes, his pupils were so tiny. They were literally as tiny as the edge of a needle. She described his eyes as reptile eyes. I literally imagined the scene and I was terrified. Apparently something has switched in his head at this moment, but again, he tried to stay in control. Whenever I think about these things, it makes me so emotional. She was a smart kid, so she tried to play it off. She told him, "Okay, I'm tired now. I want to go to bed." So she went to her bedroom, and then he came in and he told her, "You want me to read you your favorite bedtime story?" So she was scared to say no. She said, "Okay." He went up to the top bunk where she slept, and he was reading the story. And then at some point, she told him, "You peed yourself." He had wet the bed, and he was so embarrassed that he left the room. He closed the door, and all night long she was staring at the door and hoping he would not come in. She was so scared. She never told her mom about this story, but she knew as a kid that whatever happened was wrong. But because she loved him, she moved on. She moved past this experience. So yeah, there's a lot of these tiny stories that come up in the books that are fascinating. Liz also had an experience with Ted. Once they were swimming in the lake, all of a sudden he pushed her in the water very violently. When she came up, she looked at him. She was mad. She wanted to scream at him, like, "What are you doing? What do you think you're doing?" And when she looked at him, she said that she could not recognize him. She was looking at Ted, but Ted was not there. I wonder what that feels like. I wonder what it's like to look at someone and not recognize them anymore. It's so mind-boggling to me. You don't understand. Anyway, this is the story of Ted Bundy. I hope you enjoyed. I hope anyone watched it. I don't know if anyone watched it, but if you watched it, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. I hope you didn't get scared. So yeah, these books, really good books, highly recommended. If you wanna learn details about the story. I was thinking about the topic of my next video, but because I'm still torn, I'm not gonna say anything now. I also added a new book to my reading list. Apparently, there's a book that Ted Bundy was obsessed with and that he read at least 4 times. And the book is called Papillon, and it's by a French author. I forgot the name. I don't want to butcher the name. I forgot it. But it's on my list now. And it's apparently the book that Molly, Liz's daughter, also read religiously because it's a book that meant a lot to Ted. It's about an innocent man who is sentenced to a lifetime in prison and who has one obsession and one obsession only, and that is to escape. Very interesting. So I guess I'll be telling you about this book soon as well. Thank you. If you watched this video, thank you for watching, and I will hopefully see you soon with a new video if I have the time to do something anytime soon. Take care and see you!